So obviously unsponsored typically is usually just you get a bunch of friends together and play. You
Mhm.
get a bunch of friends together who are good and you think you be on a team and then you just play. And so it's something like that usually. And then from that unsponsored team you gain sort of recognition. And then you kind of work your way up to an academy team. And I think the biggest difference between academy and unsponsored is that you're making money. Um,
Mhm.
and so making money is obviously a good thing. And so I would say most academy teams probably make anywhere from like $1,000 to $3,000 a month, US dollars. And sort of at that point, it was really nice having something to show for my effort. And then moving up from contenders to owl, um, contenders, the jump from unsponsored to contenders was a lot smaller than contenders to owl was. And so contenders to owl was like not scary, but it was definitely just a big jump that I wasn't fully expecting.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today's guest comes from us previously playing with contender teams such as Second Wind, Last Night's Leftovers. After doing the Contenders grind, he made his way into Atlanta Reign's Overwatch team. Please let me introduce Nathan Goebel, maybe better known as just Fried. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. One of the things I noticed about you, because I like research all of my guests when I have them come on my show. Obviously, you have not done a lot of media and entertainment, and so kind of like to start off the show with a fairly easy question. Why haven't you done a ton of like media or putting yourself out there, or kind of taking on interviews?
Um, I guess an easy way to answer that is I haven't been asked. I think I'm a very like good public speaker and I'm good in front of camera, but the simple answer is that I haven't been asked. And then also, I think a reason for that is I don't really stream or anything, and so I prided myself on just kind of keeping my head down and just grinding the game as much as I could, and then I eventually ended up in Overwatch League. But the thing is about Overwatch League is you're now a lot more in the public eye, and so building up your own brand or building up your own sort of outside of game stuff is also very important. And I think I'm sort of coming to terms with that right now.
So kind of like delving into this like philosophy of like getting out there and me, I like when I worked with gladiators, I think this is something that people don't really realize being in the scene is while it is a competition, it's also entertainment. And so you do
Yeah.
need to kind of put yourself out there and be out there. Do you think, do you struggle with being out there or doing interviews, or do you think other people struggle with it? Like coming from this idea of I just need to play the game to now you're an entertainer.
I think not for myself because I did stuff in grade school and high school that made me comfortable with like public speaking and sort of putting myself out there. My personality isn't necessarily geared to it, but I do think a lot of people in the Overwatch League were, just gamers, and I think gamers can be a little awkward at times, to put it lightly. And so I think some people do kind of struggle being in front of camera or that sort of pressure like that. Although I would say the percentage is pretty small of people who um, are concerned with that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So kind of looking at you, how old are you, Fried?
I am 19,
Okay, you're 19. You're
about to be
fairly
20.
Oh,
Yeah.
20, big 20, big two. Actually, 20, for me, 20 wasn't that big of a deal. 21 was kind of a big deal. 20 was
Yeah.
like, eh. Um,
Yeah, I'm about 2 months away from 20. Yeah.
well, I will say happy birthday now because I will probably forget in 2 months. And this is like my safety net kind of going forward here. Where did you grow up, Fred?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
St. Louis, Missouri. Okay, what was St. Louis, Missouri like for you growing up?
Um, St. Louis is kind of weird because while it is a city, it really isn't a city in the traditional sense that like LA, San
Mm-hmm.
Francisco, Chicago, that kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
is. It's very spread out. And so I grew up mostly in the suburbs of St. Louis, and it was my life growing up was fairly easy. Or not easy, but I guess all you could really ask for. I had great parents, I had great living conditions and all that stuff. I had great family to be around. And growing up there, I think really sort of developed me into the person I am today, specifically, I think in middle school and high school and my environment at the time.
So St. Louis, pretty known for barbecue too, right?
Yes.
Okay, I actually was just down in St. Louis. I think it was 3 months ago. I went to 2 different barbecue places, Sugar Fire, and then I cannot remember the other one, but it was also really good. Do you guys pride yourself on your barbecue down there?
Yes and no. A lot of people don't necessarily recognize it as like a very good barbecue town, but I think it is. I think the city is about it's predominantly black. I think there's like the majority is black people, and so I think that brings a lot of like Southern influence into the cuisine and stuff like that. And so there's also like very good fried chicken, very good stuff like that. And I think we do get sort of a taste of everything in St. Louis, and I think our barbecue is one of those. Sugar Fire is actually about 10 minutes away from my city.
It's so good.
Or not 10 minutes away from my city, about 10 minutes away from my house, sorry.
Yeah. It was, I think Sugar Fire was my favorite of the 2 places that I went to. I cannot remember the other one to save my life. I was down there for the League of Legends finals. Actually, St. Louis, funny thing, I don't know if you know this, but someone who used to work with Overwatch League, Jason Baker, Alchemist, who did all of the production, he's actually from St. Louis too.
Oh, so, cool.
Yeah, so I know that he's moving, I think, to Arizona now for some secret project that he's working on. But kind of looking at St. Louis, you said that you kind of grew up in the suburbs. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I'm one of 4. Or not one of 4, one of 5, I mean. And so I'm the baby out of all 5 of my siblings. I have a brother and 3 sisters.
So what was it like growing up with 3 sisters?
So the thing is, they're all significantly older than me and come from my parents. They come from my parents' previous relationship. So my parents both had 2 children with a different spouse, and then after they got divorced, they got married and then had me. And so my closest sibling to me is my sister, and she is like 8 or 9 years away from me. And so I grew up with my family, specifically my 2 sisters, because my other siblings lived about 10 minutes away with their mom. And so I grew up mostly with my sisters, and then by the time I was like about 8 or so, like pretty much everybody was out of the house. And so after I was about 8, I was pretty much an only child, and that's sort of where video games took like a big I guess place in my life, because by the time you get to like the 3rd kid with with adults, they don't, or parents, I guess, you care a lot about your first child and stuff, but by the time you get to your 3rd, it's like you get kind of lazy, and so they would just give me like an Xbox or something, and I'd sit there all day, and my parents would leave for a couple hours, and I would still be, they would leave me and I'd be playing Xbox or something, and then they'd come back and I'd still be playing Xbox.
So looking at that, video games starting to play a large part of your life, but you mentioned that you did some things that kind of got you ready for like public speaking. So looking at your school, what was school like for you growing up?
So I went to like private Catholic school. My family, or at least my mom's side, is like very, very Catholic and sort of old school in that sense. And so I went to private Catholic grade school for the first part, and then in St. Louis, high school is a very big deal. And so high schools are very, very competitive, and like there's a common question among like St. Louis folk that like you ask, where did you go to high school, and depending on what answer they give you, you instantly can tell like what part of town these guys are from, who they hung out with, what they're kind of like personality wise. And I really can't underestimate it enough how big of like your high school experience kind of molds you in St. Louis culture, I guess. And so I went to CBC, and it's a very, very it's actually right next to Maryville. I don't know if you're familiar with Maryville.
I actually worked for RMU, who competes against Maryville, way back when.
Yeah, so they're about not even 5 minutes, like 2 minutes down the road from Maryville. and yeah, like they're a very like competitive athletic team.
Hmm.
And so they're actually building an esports program
Yeah.
that they wanted to get, just like like they wanted to ask me a bunch of questions about it, and recently when I was there, and I wish I wish that program was there, but I'm glad that they're taking when I was there, but I'm glad they're taking that step and really sort of being one of the first high schools in the St. Louis area to do that.
So you mentioned this almost like college lifestyle and procedures. Is there a lot of judgment for people who go to different high schools then?
Absolutely. Um, you it's like it's very sort of certain high schools are like more cliquey than others, and so certain they're predominantly like most of the private high schools they're like only one sex, and so it's either all girls or all boys. And so the school that I went to was all boys. There are very few like co-ed private high schools, but they are there. But like I said, you can, if you ask where somebody is going to school, and then you hear about it, like I said, you instantly know who they hang out with, instantly know what sort of what part of town they're from, and just sort of like weird, like small stuff like that you can instantly gather from asking what high school did you go to.
Hmm. So you mentioned that you started out in a private Catholic school and that your mom's side is fairly religious. Did religion play a large role in your life growing up?
No, my parents never really like forced that upon me. They're both Catholics, but my dad he's not really a practicing Catholic. My mom growing up was always a pretty big like practicing Catholic. Like she'd go, at least once a week to church and stuff like that. But they never really forced that upon me. Only when I was like really young, when I was like 3, did I really have to go to church. But ever since then, I would rather stay inside and play video games on Sunday instead of going to church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so kind of looking at that, you mentioned that video games kind of played a role in your life. Did other things like related to school play a role in your life too?
I guess so. I was like in grade school, you sort of just play like every sport that they kind of throw in front of you, and so I did play a decent amount of sports, and I think that's where I get a lot of my competitiveness from. I'm very sort of competitive in game,
Mm-hmm.
and I think playing sports in grade school and middle school really sort of shaped that for me, and it kind of got me to where I am today in a super super exclusive and professional environment in the Overwatch League.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going through school, what kind of student were you? Were you a good student, terrible student?
Early on in grade school and middle school, I was like a pretty excellent student. I had like straight A's and stuff, and I was in like the advanced like program or whatever. And then probably towards the end of middle school, I sort of like started falling off a little bit just because I didn't really care about school. I thought it was stupid. And then going into high school, I was a pretty mediocre student, I would say. I just like didn't really care, and like just kind of got by. I never really like left my mark on my high school experience.
Mm-hmm. So were you one of those students who like didn't have to study that much, so you just did like the bare minimum that you kind of had to get like fairly decent grades? Or
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, my mentality, I guess, was pretty much just getting by.
yeah.
And my parents were like super super upset at that because like they knew I was capable of like a lot more, and I would rather play video games, and so I committed. Once Overwatch came out, I pretty much every day after school at like 3:30, I'd go home and then play Overwatch probably for 8 hours until like 11 o'clock or midnight, and then I would wake up pretty early, like 6:30 or 7, like super super tired, and then go to school, and like I would half-ass my homework in the morning or like do it in the class before, and so I was just sort of getting by basically.
Mm-hmm. So you're getting by in just school there. Did you have lots of friends at school, or were you mostly just like the only thing that really matters to me is video gaming?
I had like a decent sized friend group at school. I from my grade school, there was only one other kid to go to my high school, and so I didn't really play any sports in high school, and so I didn't have a lot of like networking
Yeah.
options available to me right when I got there. But I would say like I had a solidified friend group that I kept until senior year, probably established in like Christmas time or um, a little bit after that of freshman
Mhm.
year, and so um, it took a little bit, but I did establish a friend circle that I did keep for the remainder of my high school experience.
Okay, but was it a friend group that you were like super close to, or was it, because it sounds like basically after middle school something happened to where video games seem to be the most important thing, especially when Overwatch comes out. Because you mentioned playing like 8 hours a day, which is
Yeah.
a lot of hours.
Yeah.
But like the priority list of things in your life there doesn't seem to be like friend groups are not definitely on that high end of the priority.
I wouldn't say that they weren't like priority, but I would up until Overwatch came out, because it came out in my sophomore year. I was like hanging out with friends,
Mm-hmm.
pretty consistently, like on the weekends and stuff. I had in high school, I never made like super close friends, although I did have like decent friends that I would do stuff on the weekends and stuff with, and go
Mm-hmm.
to sports games and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
I keep a smaller group of friends that I knew from grade school, like 3 or 4 guys that I'm very close with to this day. And I would, if I did something like later on in high school when I was doing Overwatch stuff, I didn't really hang out with my high school friends. It was my friends from grade school that I would go out with, because those were like my guys. Those were my super close friends that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned in middle school that you didn't care as much. Is that where you started to play a lot more video games then?
No, I had always played video games since I was a kid. My dad got like an original Xbox, and he actually played it first, but he got Halo on the original Xbox, and I think Halo might have been the first game I ever played.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got it for himself, and then I remember I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I remember I just picked it up one time, and like I fell in love with video games pretty much since then. I would play, we didn't have Xbox Live or anything, and so I would play just the campaigns of games over and over and over and over and over. And then we eventually got an Xbox 360, and I didn't get Xbox Live until probably 2010 or something. And so I would just do the same thing where I'd be just playing campaigns over and over and over and over, because my parents were like pretty busy people,
Mm-hmm.
because at a certain point they got divorced, and so they were both single, and so they were working pretty consistently. And so when I was home alone, that was all I would do, was just play video games.
What did your parents do for livings?
My dad is an architect, and then my mom is a was a radiologist. So she does like X-rays and
Yeah.
mammography and stuff like that. My mom is now an accountant, but my dad is still an architect.
Okay. Were either of those careers like, I'm obviously growing up, like I don't think you were like, I don't, maybe you were thinking you're like, oh, I'm just gonna play video games professionally. I would question that if you were, because I think most of the people I've
Yeah.
talked to, they aren't like, oh yeah, this is my like. There's very few people who I found who are like that. But did you ever think about like looking at either one of those careers that your parents did?
Um, Definitely sort of for my dad, I'm terrible at math, and so my mom is very good at math, and so I think she really did find something that suits her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I take a lot from my dad, and he's a very creative minded person, and so I liked sort of looking at things and looking how they worked and how they were put together, and so architecture sort of fits that description. And so I thought about it a little bit, but when I growing up, I always wanted to be like something in aviation. I was always really fascinated with planes, and so if I wasn't doing Overwatch stuff, or video game stuff, I guess in general, I would probably be doing something in aviation.
Okay. You mentioned that your parents got divorced. When did that happen?
Probably when I was about 7 years old.
Okay, so you were pretty young. My parents got divorced right when I was around 6.
Yeah.
Was it something that was hard on you?
No, my parents always had a very good working relationship when it came to me. And so, it never really felt like there was any hostility between them. They just wanted the best for me. They lived, after my parents got divorced, they lived about 5 minutes away from each other. And so what I would do is I would stay a week at my mom's house, then a week at my dad's house, and so on and so forth, and sort of alternate like that. And um, it never really like took a toll on me, I guess you could say.
Oh, that's really good. Like, sounds like they had
Yeah.
a really good. Like, I used to work with people who like divorced, especially like if there was issues with kids and stuff. That sounds like amazing. Like, like kind of like that. Like that's the most ideal situation, obviously.
Yeah.
With that kind of scenario happening. Someone is staring at me and it's throwing me off. I think it's Dog Man. So kind of looking at like moving forward here, and you mentioned that your parents didn't really like the fact that you weren't doing as well in school. What was that like for you?
You know, it was like like I said in St. Louis, the high school stuff is a really big deal, and so I was going to a private school, and so they had to pay, you know, a lot of money for me to go there. And when you don't see results, you know, they didn't mind doing that investment, but when they didn't see results that they had expected, you know, I'm sure it was probably a little worrisome. And so I kind of butted heads a little bit with them. Never anything super big, but like I butted heads with them specifically towards my latter half of high school. Because that's really when I realized I could probably do something with Overwatch, and then I really sort of committed to it more so than any other thing in my life, including school.
So looking at school, did they ever like I can't imagine them paying for a private school, and then like did they know about the amount of time you're putting in video games? Did they ever like try to threaten to take that stuff away from you, anything like that?
Yes and no. They knew how much I was playing, but like like I said, I had that just get by mentality, so I was never like, you know, below the red line where it was like in danger level, but I was never like exceeding that well. It really sort of culminated in my senior year when like I was like failing 2 classes or something. And I remember they took it away, and I remember I was playing with L&L at the time. And me and my parents have a pretty good like working relationship, and so they didn't take my computer, but I just gave them my mouse and keyboard so I couldn't play. And so I remember for like maybe about a week I just couldn't play, and I had to catch up on my stuff and not be failing. But you know, other than that, I was like a BC student, I would say.
So when did you think, okay, I wanna play video games professionally? I'm assuming it's Overwatch was the first game that you probably had that thought with. So because you said it came out your sophomore year of high school, and you started putting a lot of time into that. Was that at what point do you think I want to go pro in Overwatch?
So when Overwatch came out, they announced the comp scene, you know, probably about a month or two into the game, and the first season I didn't really get into it. I would much rather play quick play at the time, and so I played season 1 a little bit, but I wasn't that high rating. I was like 65 or something like that, which is still like okay, I guess. But then season 2 came out, and I remember I just played it more because my friends were doing it more. And I remember I got like top 500 like the first season. I actually like legitimately tried to, and I never thought I would get that far. I thought I would get to like, you know, maybe Diamond or Masters if I was lucky. I never thought I would get to Grandmaster, and so Grandmaster and top 500. And so when I got to that, I was like, oh, like I'm actually pretty good at this game. And so at that point, I didn't like commit to it professionally or anything, but like it was sort of like a moment where I was like, oh, like I'm actually pretty good. Maybe I can sort of do something with this. And so it just continued, and I kept getting top 500, top 500, top 500. And then I was like, I got kind of bored of ranked, and then I was like, I want to start competing. And so then, you know, like a lot of other players, you just kind of find a team through the OW or something like that, and then you just sort of slowly crawl your way up the sort of hidden ladder in like the tier 3 scene at the time, or the tier 2 scene, and you sort of climb up and make a name for yourself, and then you eventually sort of like end up on like better rosters. Then you get, you know, more recognition, and you start playing in tournaments online, and you know, just sort of stuff like that.
So I want to ask you kind of a philosophical question here, and this kind of like, so this is a debate that I have with a lot of people going in there. Do you believe that you are naturally talented at Overwatch, or do you think that this is a accumulation of skills over years?
A little bit of both. I was always an FPS player naturally. I never really played that many other games in like different genres. I'm a big single player game fan, so games like The Last of Us,
Mhm.
Uncharted, that sort of thing, really sort of tickle my fancy, and I like playing games like that. But primarily, I was playing FPS, so Halo, Call of Duty, that sort of thing, and um, I had I pretty much played COD religiously up until Overwatch came out, and I had always put hundreds of hours into each game, and I think those sort of FPS skills transition into Overwatch skills because obviously it's an FPS, but
Yeah.
I really sort of took what made me good at COD and sort of transitioned it into Overwatch.
So you start hitting up the tier 3 ladder, and you mentioned kind of a hidden ladder that is involved with kind of like the tier 3 scene. What do you mean by a hidden ladder working your way up?
So now like there's obviously a little bit more structure to it with contenders and stuff, but back 2 3 years ago there really wasn't anything super structured, and so you really had to like work to make a name for yourself. And it was pretty much just via online tournaments. And so you have to get your name out there, and you have to do it quickly if you want to get into those tournaments. And so you just sort of you scrim, and if you scrim the better teams, and they like take notice or whatever, then they might ask you to play for them or whatnot. Like similar to a scenario with Silk Thread. Silk Thread was just like a ladder player essentially, and
Mhm.
XQC knew he was good, and so yeah, Silk Thread, hey, play for my team, and it's just sort of you have to build up like a repertoire basically, um, in order to get on a better team, which then a better team gets you, more coverage or more exposure or whatnot, and then you eventually end yourself up or end up in a better position.
So you mentioned in high school you did some things that kind of prepared you for public speaking that helped kind of get you out there where you feel at least more comfortable with it. I don't know if it's something you naturally like to do, but you're at least comfortable with it. What
Yeah.
were those things that kind of put you in a position to get comfortable for doing public
Well,
speaking?
it was mostly in middle school, but I did a little bit of like public speaking in high school.
Hmm.
Obviously, in high school, they force like projects on you and stuff like that, and so you have to, if you don't want to get like a really bad presentation grade, you have to be a good presenter. And I remember like my content, because I would never really work that hard to make it super good, so my content grade was always pretty low, but my presentation grade was always very good because I knew how to present and talk to people and convey it to people. But I got most of those skills from being in student council in middle school, and so you're always like talking to people when you're involved and stuff like that. And like in middle school, if you were part of student council, you had to say like the messages of the day over the intercom, and I think that sort of small thing that I did every day really made me comfortable with being in public and being sort of on camera or over the microphone or something like that.
Hmm. So kind of looking at that, what made you want to do stuff like student council?
Um, I don't really remember in middle school. I think it was just something to do, and at the time I was like a pretty good student, um, and so I just wanted to do stuff like that. And I remember just thinking, when they presented student council, because you have to be like a certain age. I think you have to be in seventh grade or something like that. And so when they presented that, I was like, oh, that seems kind of fun. I would like to do that. And then I just sort of took that jump and then just did it until my grade school career closed or middle school career.
Hmm. So, kind of looking at high school, most people are like, especially like college, kind of comes into mind.
Hmm.
Did college ever come into your mind like, oh, maybe it's something I want to do, especially with like maybe looking at like esports stuff? Because you're fairly young, so I think I don't know if Maryville had an Overwatch team, but I'm almost positive they had like a League of Legends team, like near you. Did you ever think about
Hmm.
going to college for maybe some sort of esports thing, like on a
Um,
scholarship?
so at the time, esports in college really wasn't a thing. It really only
Mhm.
like kind of blossomed maybe like a year after I graduated high school, or like sort of after that time. I really sort of saw a bunch of schools doing it, but I got to my like late junior year, early senior year, that sort of stuff, and like your counselors in the school and your parents are like really pushing, like when are you gonna or where are you gonna go to college and stuff like that. And so the obvious choice for me at the time was Mizzou, which is the University of Missouri, which is where a lot of St. Louis people go. But slowly as my like Overwatch career sort of like started taking off, I like saw myself less and less going to college. And like I said, I wasn't a very good student. I wasn't really ready to take that leap to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And so, by the time like applications rolled around, my parents were like, have you applied yet? Have you applied? No, no, no. Like, where are you going to apply and stuff like that. And I would just tell them something. And then, it got to a point where like applications were like maybe a week from due. And I remember it was like really scary that I had to tell my parents like, hey, like, I don't really want to go to college. And so taking that leap and then having it work out in the end, it was like a really, really fulfilling thing for me.
Okay, and so looking at that conversation, because that's a conversation, I imagine a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I want to do esports as like a thing, but like college is like a big thing that kind of comes up. What was that conversation like with your parents to be like, hey, listen, I want to either not go to college or wait to go to college? I'm assuming you framed it as wait to go to college for a while. How did that conversation go?
My parents are like very patient and understanding people. So fortunately it wasn't super explosive or anything like that. But yeah, like I said, it was like a scary leap because I didn't know how they would react. My parents are a little bit older, so they're both about 60. And so having to make that leap and tell them, was really, really scary. And I didn't know how they would react. And the thing that made it harder was I wasn't making money at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was on sponsored teams. And so I really didn't make money playing Overwatch, or at least that much of it, until I went on the Gladiators Contenders team. And so having something to show that like, hey, like I can do this was hard. And so I was constantly like having to prove myself, like here's what's going on with me. After high school, like I was constantly like, this is what I'm working on. This is what we're like working towards. And stuff like that. And it was really, really hard to sort of put that together because I also wasn't like doing part-time classes or anything. So I was pretty much just playing Overwatch, and sort of proving myself to them was a challenge in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you were playing like 8 hours a day, like during school. When school got out, how many hours a day were you playing?
Probably about the same. Like it was like pretty much when school was out, like, and I was in summer or whatever, I'd pretty much wake up, kind of mess around on my computer, and then I was like playing Overwatch. And so it was probably about, like I said, another 8, 9 hours, 8, 9, 10 hours, something like that.
So kind of looking at that, you're playing on these unsigned teams. Obviously, one of the first teams that you kind of, at least per your Wikipedia, which I don't know if you look at your Wikipedia, but it's very bare. So you might want to get someone to like fluff that up a little bit. But one of the first teams that you played on is a team called Anime is Real, which is a hilarious name. Are you a huge anime fan?
No, not really. I mean, I watched like Naruto and stuff growing up, but like, that it was just like a funny name that like me and my friends who were also good at the game came up with.
Mm-hmm. So you move on from Anime is Real to probably one of the more famous teams in at least Contenders history, LNL, Last Night's Leftovers, which I think they were actually called something else when you joined them that I do not remember.
It was called Rob 420 Blase because it was a team that had Rob 420 or Rob Dab on it and Blase, and then Rob got picked up to go to NRG, their Contenders team, and then Blase. I think Blase and Corey were both on it actually, and Blase and Corey both went to Gladiators
Legion.
Contenders.
Yeah. They were both on Legion. So LNL is a fairly famous team, and I've had other people who were actually on LNL kind of working there. I obviously have had MKL on the show, who did some work with LNL for a bit. I don't remember if you were around. I didn't check the timetable. But what was LNL like for you?
LNL was like the first team that really sort of like kind of concreted my belief that like I could do something with it. It was a pretty competitive team, although once we got into like actual Contenders, we were like, I think one of the worst teams that I think we only won maybe like one game or something like that. But it really sort of like broadened my horizons a little bit because I was playing with specifically like Dummy and Ajax, and they were both on NRG. And like, when you're in the unsigned or in the unsponsored scene, then you look up to the sponsored teams, and so
Yeah.
those were the guys that like I would see on streams and stuff. And so I thought it was like, something really cool to play with guys like that.
So run me through, like, looking at LNL and the differences compared to both academy teams and Overwatch teams. What's the difference look like between an unsigned team and a Contenders team versus an Overwatch League team?
So obviously unsponsored typically is usually just you get a bunch of friends together and play. You get a bunch of friends together who are good, and you think you be on a team, and then you just play. And so it's something like that usually. And then from that unsponsored team, you gain sort of recognition, and then you kind of work your way up to an academy team. And I think the biggest difference between academy and unsponsored is that you're making money. And so making money is obviously a good thing. And so I would say most academy teams probably make anywhere from like $1,000 to $3,000 a month, US dollars. And sort of at that point, it was really nice having something to show for my effort. And then moving up from Contenders to OWL, Contenders, the jump from unsponsored to Contenders was a lot smaller than Contenders to OWL was. And so Contenders to OWL was like not scary, but it was definitely just a big jump that I wasn't fully expecting.
Okay, and can you let's take it a step by step then. Unsigned to a Contenders, you mentioned that there wasn't that big of a difference. Especially paid teams. That seems, other than the fact that they're paying you, like that seems a little like almost like baffling to me. That like this unsigned team is actually able to keep up with like I don't know what resources they put towards. I know some of the resources, but like obviously because I worked with Gladiators, but like. Some of the like you're saying that there wasn't that much of a difference in the resources that you got between like LNL versus like Legion.
I wouldn't say the resources were like less. Definitely when you go to academy team, they're like a little bit more. But the big jump for me was from second win to Legion, because I wasn't on LNL when I moved to Legion, and so the structure and sort of stuff like that from second win to Legion was like fairly similar. You sort of do similar hours, and then similar like review times and stuff like that. And so had second win been a paid team, I would have stayed with them 100%. All those guys I'm still super good friends with, and I was super good friends with on the team at the time, and I really liked playing with everybody there. I thought everybody was a good player, but obviously at a certain point you need to start making money, and so I went to Legion.
So let's talk about second wind a little bit then. Second wind almost seems to have a formula, or at least some sort of method, considering how often their team gets poached, which seems to happen like all the time. And they've still been competitive, like even though that this occurs all the time. Why do you think that is?
I think the staff does a very good job at sort of looking at players and who's good. They scour the ladder pretty hard, because me and Haku, who are on like the first like good second win team. There was a second win roster before us that was very, very bad. But the good second win team, me and Haku are both like pretty big like stat guys, and so we both like look at stats on ladder and stuff like that. And so you can, I can tell off somebody's stats how they play, and what heroes they play and stuff like that, and how good they are. And so we basically, while we were on there, and we had to find players, we would say like, these are good stats. You want a certain damage number per 10 on Tracer or Zarya or something that you want to look for. And if they have something close to this, that means they're probably good. And then I think specifically Flubby, he's not on second win anymore. I think he's with Giganti. But he's like a very sort of nice. He's a very sort of nice and understanding guy, and so I think, given like player to player, he sort of knows what will help them, and I think he did a good job with a lot of the newer younger players, like Speedily, for example, had never really been on a super competitive team. He played a little bit in open, but he's also a very young player, and I think they made Speedily like a very, very good player and gave him a good base to move forward. Because now obviously he's on like XL2 and I think they're doing fairly well. But I think just they sort of take players who have potential and really sort of make them blossom.
Do you think that has to do like with the coaching staff? Because or do you think that it's just the environment they kind of put them in, or do you think it's a combination?
I would think just the environment. Everybody there has sort of like a brotherhood environment. You really sort of, when you're unsponsored, you sort of have this sort of brotherhood, because it's not like you were picked up, to an academy team. It's not like you were just selected because people thought you were good. It's like, you picked them because you liked them, and I guess that's sort of not true because you do pick them up because they're good, but it just goes a little further if you're all unsponsored. And so they sort of do build this like brotherhood, and it really, you put a lot of trust into your teammates, and just sort of having that extra trust and stuff really like takes that team to the next level, I think, even if their players aren't as good.
Do you think a team like Second Wind's good because they trust each other so much? And like I know that for especially like Overwatch and like pro teams, you start getting paid. Like the thought of, I could lose my job kind of comes in place. But it sounds like with Second Wind, you're not getting paid, so it's more like I want to work towards my family. I want to impress my family, not I'm worried about losing my job.
I think for some it is like impressing their family or whatever, but I think some people just want to play on like a good team or whatever. And so, I think when you do have that level of trust, it definitely like elevates your gameplay to the next level. For instance, Atlanta Academy has been playing for so long, and those guys are all really, really, really close friends with each other that they will make a call in game and everybody will follow it up. And that level of trust has only ever happened to me on Second Wind, where it's like a very, very, hive mind sort of mentality. And I think Atlanta Academy right now has that sort of hive mind mentality where everybody is just sort of for one and nobody's really individual.
Do you think something like that the hive mind mentality is achievable in Overwatch League, or do you think it's going to be very hard for anyone to ever do that?
Yes and no. I think it is very hard because you have a lot of different people from a lot of different places, and so not everybody speaks English. But I think if you do, I think teams like Vancouver, for example, and Shock have really built. Vancouver obviously was like a team forever in Contenders and Runaway, and so they're all friends with each other and stuff. And I think Shock didn't necessarily have that that setup, but I think their staff in specific has really built an environment like that. And I think guys like Super and Sinatra really like Super and Sinatra are kind of like LeBron James and like the NBA. It's like everybody wants to sort of play with them. And so when you build that sort of environment and build that sort of, I guess, mindset, everybody sort of buys into it. And then you really sort of see the results come to fruition when you have that level of trust and friendship in your teammates.
So kind of looking at that, obviously we mentioned Vancouver, and Vancouver was a team that basically they just implanted the entire thing. And I could see how you could achieve that with a team that you literally buy out all the pieces of like a previous team who has like built each other up and had lots of structure and doing it. So that would make sense. But I feel like bringing people in is a lot harder to achieve that. But kind of looking at this idea of just buying out an entire team, do you think that the correct approach or like a good approach to making competitive teams in Overwatch is to just buy out a full-on roster, or do you think it's to buy pieces and build it?
It depends roster to roster, right? Like it's never like as black and white as people think it is. Sometimes certain pieces mesh well with others, but I would say it's fairly safe to pick up or do something like Vancouver did, where they pick a super, super competitive team in Runaway, and really sort of give the resources that Overwatch League provides and sort of take that to the next level and take that bonding and friendship and also skill that they had on Runaway, and then take it with all the resources Overwatch League has and make them an even better version of themselves. And so I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer. I think you could pick up pieces and sort of build around certain players, but I think it varies from team to team.
Now, you've already mentioned that there was a huge difference going from Contenders to Overwatch League, and we kind of talked about some of the resources that are there and how to improve, how Vancouver improved themselves. What is the some of the biggest differences between Contenders and Overwatch League that you've seen?
Obviously, the coverage is the first biggest one that comes to mind. In Contenders, you get like maybe 2 to 3,000 viewers, whereas in Overwatch League, it can go well above 100,000 consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just have a lot more eyes watching you, and there's just, everybody sort of like knows who you are and stuff like that. And I think in Contenders, it's just like, you're pretty good, but like Overwatch League really sort of cements that. It's like, oh, like everybody, like this guy's in Overwatch League, he must be pretty good, So it's just that for me, that was like the scariest leap. It was like having all the eyes looking on you, and you want to play well so that people are happy with what they see and stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you ever worry about has the pressure ever kind of gotten to you or like bother you? Like, oh my God, I need to play well. I need to perform in front of these people. Has that ever bothered you?
Yes and no. I think every player sort of has some sort of, I guess, inhibition in their head that like, I'm nervous, like I won't play as well. But I think once you get up to the stage and you really sort of get locked into the mental space that you need to be, it all sort of melts away. And so I think while I have gotten nervous, it definitely like goes away. And I think every player sort of has like pre-match nerves or pre-match jitters or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of looking at the teams, what do you think makes teams competitive with each other, right? Like what do you think gives teams the edge? Like obviously Vancouver, they picked up an entire really, really good roster, but what do you think gives teams like Shock or Atlanta an edge going into the competition versus everyone else? Like what do you guys like fall back on that makes it so you can come out and beat some of the best teams in the league?
I think, it like I said, it varies from team to team. And so in GOAT's meta, I think the thing that really made teams the best was having that super, super like big brotherhood environment or super big trustworthy environment, and trust in your teammates that you would listen to each other. And so in GOAT's meta, that's, I think, teams like Vancouver and teams like Shock, who did have that super big trust within each other, did succeed. And I think going into this now 2-2 stage, I think teams with individual performers will outshine a lot of teams who maybe have good teamwork. Teamwork in Overwatch will always be probably a top 2 or 3 important things, simply because it is a team game facilitated around 6 players all working together. But I think you'll definitely see a lot better or more individual performances going into stage 4.
Okay, so kind of looking at like 2-2 and bringing that up, do you think that, like, obviously we had roster lock happen, right? And so like they knew about 2-2, you could definitely add for 2-2. Do you think it's fair on teams though to the way that like 2-2 was implemented, or like the fact that it takes a team like Vancouver losing to Washington Justice because of 2-2? Do you think that this is a fair approach?
Kinda. That's always going to be sort of a weird thing about Overwatch, is that you're going to introduce patches that are completely different from the previous. And so when you do have a meta as polarizing as GOATs, and then switch to, a more, I guess you'd say, traditional way to play Overwatch, although there really hasn't been a traditional way to play Overwatch over the last 3 years, it does sort of, it's like a weird contrast, I guess you could say, but I don't necessarily think it's unfair because all the teams sign up for it, and it's on them to build a roster that is meta proof and is flexible and stuff like that.
Do you guys at Atlanta feel pretty secure about the 2-2? Are you happy that 2-2 came in, or would you have rather have seen GOATs stay?
I think obviously our stage 4 success has been pretty good on 2-2. I think our DPS players, in specific, really like playing DPS characters. I personally am a big fan of GOATs. I like the tightness and teamwork involved in that meta. But I am happy to play Roadhog, which is like pretty much the character that I started out playing. And so I think our TPS players like Erster are really good at Shine. And he obviously has so far, Erster, Baby Bay, Enlayer. What's really cool about Enlayer's story is that people thought it would be like a nepotism signing because he was on LNL with Brad.
Yeah.
And, he's been benched the first 3 stages, and now he comes into stage 4 and he's dominated on Widowmaker. And so that, for me, that's a really, really, really cool story to, I guess, be a part of because he is on my team.
Mm-hmm. And kind of looking at Brad, I know that like nepotism, which I remember like people mentioning nepotism. It sounds like he's actually like fairly smart in the way that he planned out the roster, especially for a lot of things. Like obviously, Defran was on the roster and he decided that he didn't want to play competitively anymore. And you guys, that hasn't seemed to be that big of an issue. So it seems like Brad has at least some ability to future-proof his roster. Would you agree with that?
I think the thing that takes Brad, that makes Brad shine in comparison to other coaches is his scouting ability.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, like myself, is very, very into ladder and ladder stats like that. And so he's very rigorous about how he approaches his scouting. And so he does go to the ladder. He checks multiple accounts and stuff like that to see if they are actually good. And so I think he does do a phenomenal job at building rosters and like scouting. For example, you could look at Sinatra and Defran. Defran was an EU stream sniper, and he was just crazy. Like, right, like if you saw some like random tracer that was just like farming all the top EU like people on stream, it was probably Defran back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And same with Sinatra. Sinatra was getting like rank 1 and 2 all the time consistently. And Brad takes all that into account and really sort of gives the benefit of the doubt of that player and believes that they are good and builds roster around talent that he sees.
Mm-hmm. So kind of looking at the Defran kind of stepping in, he was a kind of controversial pick getting in there. I want to kind of more know, I don't want to talk so much about Defran, but more so him leaving and the effect that caused for like you. And like coming in here, did you guys know that he was going to step down? Was it a kind of a shock to you guys, or were you guys all prepared for it?
I was not on the team at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I joined the team at the beginning of stage 2, and so Defran obviously left after stage 1. So I really don't know how that scenario broke down.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get brought in? Did you get brought in after, like, were you brought in before stage 2 at all, or literally just at the like a week before stage 2 starts? They contact you, like, hey, listen, we want you to move up.
The latter situation. I was pretty much approached on I think Atlanta had a match on like a Thursday or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was approached the Friday before, and I was told by my coaches at Legion, I was like, hey, like you're getting scouted by Atlanta right now. Nothing has happened yet, but like we just want you to know that you're getting scouted. And
Mm-hmm.
then Saturday I had a meeting with the Atlanta people, and then Sunday it was like I found out I was getting scouted Friday, and then like Sunday or Monday I had a meeting, and then like I think Tuesday I had a contract sent to me, and then like on Wednesday, I think the day before the match, I had a flight to LA.
That's very quick moving.
Yeah.
Were you scared when you got into Overwatch League? Like when you first get in there, I imagine that that's got to be terrifying. Like coming in so quickly and playing, and did you feel prepared or not?
No, I was kind of getting bored of Contenders. I knew I was like one of the best off tanks in Contenders at the time, at least in NA. And so I wanted to take that next step. Obviously, taking that big of a step is kind of scary a little bit, but like I said, once I got up on stage for the first time and I really sort of locked into that mindset, it felt as natural as playing, at my mom's house or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things I kind of want to check with, obviously, season 1, like I remember lots of players kind of coming out and talking about how exhausting the season was. I've had players already kind of talk about, or at least coaches. I know I had Harsha from Vancouver Titans come on here, and he was like, it's just as exhausting as it was season 1. How do you feel about kind of like the exhaustion and burnout so far over the stage? Because we're almost coming to the end. It's getting there. You guys are obviously fighting for to make playoffs and to get into the playoff bracket to play in. What do you guys like? How's the exhaustion, man? I imagine you guys are pushing yourself as hard as possible.
Yeah, it varies from team to teams. I know a lot of the Chinese teams play like 10 to 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it varies from team to team, and I think some certain teams are better at managing burnout for their players than others. And
Hmm.
for me personally, burnout has really never been an issue. I've gotten kind of like bored of the game at certain points, but burning out to the point where like I didn't want to play has never really been an issue for me.
Okay. And why do you think that is with you? Why do you think that you're
Um,
resilient towards it?
because I have the most fun playing Overwatch in competition. Like I can play ranked a little bit, but obviously everybody sort of has their limit with
Yeah.
ranked because it is very very bad at times. Um, but when I've had the most fun I've ever had playing a video game is playing Overwatch in scrims or competition, and so it never really gets boring for me. And so I've
Hmm.
sort of um, kind of put burnout away because I don't get burned out as long as I'm playing competitively.
Yeah. Because you enjoy it. It's a lot of fun for
Yeah,
you still. And a
yeah,
lot of people, I think, lose that enjoyment, which I think is a huge factor in the reason why. That makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Kind of looking at your family and stuff like that, do you have a lot of time to kind of be able to talk to them or spend time with them or any significant others?
Um, Not really. I mean, I live in LA now, and they live in St.
Hmm.
Louis. I do give them like a text, or my mom or dad will usually text me after a game and be like, nice job or whatever. Um, but yeah, I don't. It's usually it never really goes more than a text or a phone call.
Hmm. Hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong. You've been dating someone for like over a year. I thought I saw something about that. How does that work with the Overwatch schedule? Because I know that when me and my girlfriend are dating almost 5 years, and we were in Overwatch, like I got to talk to her like one day a week, and it was kind of hard doing that. How's it been kind of for you?
Um, it's been okay. Obviously, Overwatch League is a lot more demanding schedule than Contenders, so it's a lot harder, I guess you could say. But
Yeah.
I do still talk with her consistently. Like
Hmm.
probably I text her pretty much every day, and then we usually talk probably about every other day or so.
Hmm. So there's a lot of talk out there that like diversifying time is kind of an issue. It sounds like you're very good at managing your time. Do you think that that's probably true? Like it seems like you're fairly self sufficient in managing your time and making sure that you can do everything that you need to do.
Um, yes and no. I think I procrastinate a lot on stuff,
Hmm.
but when I know I need to get stuff done, I like you said, I do think I manage my time pretty well. And
Hmm.
so like after scrims, I'll like go to the gym or something, then I'll play ranked or whatever after, and then do whatever it is after that, whether it's playing a game recreationally or playing more Overwatch or like talking to friends or my girlfriend.
Hmm. So you mentioned the gym day. Do you think that the gym is really important to you in making sure that you feel at least good?
Yes, I think when I was in Contenders and unsigned, I didn't really do any physical activity at all.
Hmm.
But I definitely think now in Overwatch League, it really does make you feel better overall. Just
Hmm.
burning, just burning some calories and getting that physical activity in because your body, like humans aren't built to be stationary or like very nomadic race, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so we're meant to be moving around all the time. And when you're not, your body is deprived of, the chemicals and stuff that you need. And so when you are giving your body that, you do have this feel good sense um, that makes you feel good. And, I think, I don't know if I've played better or worse because of it, but I do definitely just have a general better sense of happiness and just feel better overall.
Hmm. So if you had to look at Overwatch League, and next year we're moving to where there's going to be lots of homesteads, and you've actually had the experience of traveling to a homestead. Are you looking forward to that, or are you worried about it?
It has its pluses and minuses.
Mhm.
Traveling for some players is very, very hard. For myself, I don't really like it or dislike it. It's kind of annoying at times to travel a bunch. But I do. The Atlanta crowd was amazing, and I would like to play in front of them again. So that aspect of it is something I'm really, really excited for.
Hmm. Yeah, something about the because just like looking at like burnout and stuff like that, it terrifies me about the traveling. Not for everyone. Some people I think are going to be fine, but I think other people who don't manage their time well, or who don't have other things in their life as well, or who don't take care of themselves, it really worries me about what like the traveling is going to do for them, as well as like different teams are going to handle it differently. And I think the teams that handle it badly it's going to be terrifying.
Yeah. Like there are pluses and benefits to it, obviously, or pluses and minuses. I mean, so you have, like some teams will do a very, very good job at facilitating their players even on the road. And I think, just making sure that infrastructure is established will really, really reduce that for a lot of players, really reduce that sort of burnout and stuff like that you mentioned.
Are you worried about practice times when it comes to traveling? Because I imagine getting the same amount of practice you're doing right now is probably going to be nigh impossible. Is that something that worries you, or are you just like whatever because it should happen to everyone?
I'm not necessarily worried about it because it's not really my job. It's the staff and management that's on them, and so whatever they do, I'll follow it, and I'm sure they will find a way to efficiently make that happen.
Okay. So one more thing that I kind of wanted to ask you going for here. If there was anything in the Overwatch League that you could see improved upon, we're not going to say anything's bad. We're going to say if there was anything you could see improved upon in the Overwatch League, what would you look to change?
I don't really know. The Overwatch League is like, it's pretty much what I asked for, in terms of like a dream job. Everything's provided for me and stuff like that. If I had to say one thing, maybe more transparency between the league and players. Like a lot of the players, I don't know if you saw or not, but like the most recent thing I can think of is this chair sponsor changed. And so we no longer have the Herman Millers. They're called like Zip chairs or something like that. And I think some people like the Zip chairs, but I would say a lot of the vast majority really like the Herman Millers. But we didn't know about it until the new chairs were just like on stage one day. And so I think being a little bit more transparent about it would be helpful. But so far so good in my Overwatch League experience.
In your Overwatch League, what about Contenders? I know Contenders is a pretty hot topic all around. You've obviously played in lots of Contenders teams. What do you think needs to improve upon in Contenders? Because you've played on unsigned teams and you've played on signed teams.
Contenders is just it's kind of just a mess. It's hard. Like I would say, you want more coverage, more just putting it out there and stuff. But the thing is, it doesn't make as much money, and so money talks. And when you're not getting as much money, there's not as much of an incentive to put more money into it, and thus make it better. And so I think there are a lot of issues with Contenders, but I don't think you can really approach them in a very healthy way without losing a bunch of money or something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, kind of looking at like teams like Second Wind or like Square One, do you think that they will always have a place in Contenders, or do you think that eventually we are going to get phased out into almost like a academy team and obviously Overwatch League team, kind of like something like League of Legends has?
I think having an underdog story is really, really good for Contenders, and the underdog sort of manifests into an unsponsored team. Yeah. And so I think Blizzard recognizes that, and I think there will always be like maybe 2 to 4 unsponsored teams within Contenders that sort of give that storyline and stuff like that a bigger platform to show.
Okay. Well, that's basically all the questions that I had for you. I have one more. That's the one I kind of ask everyone else, unless there was anything else you wanted to bring up. But my last question is always fairly easy or fairly hard, depending on who you are. You've had the experience being on the show. It's been a lot of fun having you. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of be here. I've had a lot of fun talking to you, getting to know you, and especially like talking about a lot of stuff that maybe other people haven't heard about. So that being said, having been on the show, if you could pick anyone to kind of come on the show, the only criteria is they have to be involved in esports and they have to speak English, because I am uncultured swine. Who would you have on the show? If you pick someone who I've had, I'll let you know.
Dogman.
Already had Dogman. You're just looking for teammates.
Oh, Dogman is such a polarizing character in the Overwatch League right now that I think
He was a lot of fun.
Yeah, striking the iron while it's hot, and I think getting him on here would be a good idea. But obviously, he's already been here. I'm trying to think who else would be somebody who would be a pretty good person to have. This is a tough one. I would say maybe venture more into staff.
Okay.
If you could get any sort of staff, because I think the perspective and reality for staff is a lot different than
it is
for a player. And so I think getting their side of the story and seeing what they have to say is will be a not enlightening experience, but an interesting thing to hear about.
Mm-hmm. So if you had to pick any staff, who would you pick? Because you've obviously worked with a lot. You've worked with some at Legion. You've obviously worked on Atlanta Rein staff. You have second win staff.
Gee, that's a hard question because I've worked with a lot of different people that I think were cool people and were good at their job. Maybe Justin from Second Win.
Okay.
Justin is a really interesting guy because he's maintaining a normal job. Like he does some sort of, I think, like warehouse management or something like that. And he was maintaining a job while also like managing Second Win, which was like, he was pretty much present all the time. And so I was always curious to how he balanced that, and that would be interesting to hear.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I've had a lot of fun. Hope you had some fun. If you have any shout outs, now would be the time to throw them out there. I don't normally give them, but if you want them, you're more than welcome to have them.
No, just keep following the Atlanta Rein and myself, I guess, and cheer us on.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show Friday. I really appreciate it. For everyone out there, this has been Deep Dives in the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.